Come on. Okay. No questions. No questions. Okay. Let's go ahead and get into our topic for today. All right, there we go. So again, our topic for that we want to head into is talking about friendships, family, sexuality, all of those things, and really talk about kind of provide a base for which then we can start looking at different cultural views and cultural ways of thinking about all of these topics. Okay. So we're going to start with talking about how does science define things like sexuality? And when I mean sexuality, I mean your biological sex, who you identify gender wise, and yes, of course, who you're attracted to for sexual reasons. Okay. I don't know how else to word that. But I do want to just differentiate when we do research on this topic, we do differentiate between the terms sex and gender. Okay. Sex is your biological designation. Okay. So if you have external genitalia, you're biologically defined as a male. If you have internal genitalia, you're biologically defined as a female. Okay. Now, what happened in the late 20th century, we're talking 1940s, 50s, and 60s, is that especially within the field of sociology and in the rise of the feminist movement, there became a need for individuals who study sex as the designation of male or female to not only study it in the idea of what you're designated as based upon your genitalia, but what it means to you to be a man or a woman. Okay. So if we look at this term gender, before 1960, the word gender was actually a medical term. It was a medical term meaning that the individual could not be identified as being a male or female. That was the original uh, meaning behind the term gender. Um, and then in the 1960s, with the feminist movement, they took over this term to mean what is the psychological meaning of your sex. So again, in the dichotomy, what does it psychologically mean to be a man versus a woman? Okay. What is it that makes you who you are based upon your sex differentiation or who you feel you are? Okay. Um, One thing we should note, I always like to put this kind of caveat in uh, lectures, is that we were all at one point biologically female. When you are conceived, for at least the first 6 weeks of development, you develop as a female. And the intent would be to the genitalia start to develop inwardly and whatnot. But then if you have that Y chromosome around the 6 weeks of development within prenatally, androgens or male hormones go over the fetus at that point, and that internal genitalia actually starts to revert to external genitalia. Okay. The reason why I bring this up is it's important to understand that there's no species difference between a male or a female. We all could be potentially a female. And some of us then have that potential of becoming a male based upon the male hormones that are present around the 6th to 8th week of gestation or development. Okay. So the real difference between us human wise is kind of a something that is of debate when we look at this from a chemical perspective. Okay. So, based on that, though, the other thing that we need to understand is that being male, female on a biological level is also on a continuum. Okay. Now, simply for the reasons for survival of, well, let me just start with this. First of all, if you look at these graphs, we will find that if we do biological panels on everyone in the class, everyone in the United States, everyone around the world, there would be no 100% biologically female or 100% biologically male. Okay, because that's not how our hormone systems work based upon our genetics. Okay, now with that being said, the majority of men who have that Y chromosome will develop external genitalia, and women who don't will not develop it. Okay. And that makes it so reproduction can happen. Okay. But I do want to note that even within the biological anatomy and the biological systems, there is a subset minority population of individuals who are actually born with both internal and external genitalia. And you probably have heard of these sometimes in Western culture. There's big debates among states about whether or not the doctor should do a reassignment surgery at birth, or if the child should be allowed to develop longer and develop into an older age and let them make a decision, or if it's up to the parents. So here in Western culture, at least here in the United States, this is something that has been of debate. But I will say, in the majority of Western culture, the decision of whether or not to surgically make it so an intersexed individual is either a boy or a girl, or male or female, has been left up to the physician or the midwife or the head of the household, which usually was the male in the household. So, um, so this is something that in Western culture, again, bringing up the cultural part of this, is very much of debate. Okay. On this biological anatomy end, even though we can do the hormone panels and show that biological sex is much more diverse than what we give it credit to, this is another debate here in the United States, whether or not there can be crossing lines of being male and female. And whether that is a possibility, it kind of comes from the dichotomy perspective of biological sex, that there's females and there's males, and there's no intertwining the two. Okay, and so this is again a cultural debate that we'll look at not only within our Western culture, but we'll look at in other cultures and their view of being male or female as we move along. Okay. But let's move from our biological to then our gender identity. Okay. If we again look at the progression of the majority of individuals, a person born as a male will take on man or masculine identity. Okay. Females will then take on more of a woman identity, or more of a feminine identity, as you would say. Okay. So this is who you identify as. But I do want to bring up again, as we look at this, gender identity isn't just simply man, woman. There are other types of gender identities that can be up here. And just a few of the examples are individuals who are transgendered. Transgendered is when an individual is born biologically one sex, but they identify and feel and think in another sex. So if it's a female and she feels really strongly about being masculine and male, then that would be considered transgendered. Okay. Interesting term, especially when we're dealing with tribal colleges, is the notion of two-spirited. Now, this is where I want to be very careful because I hope we all know how diverse Native American communities can be. So this what didn't exist in all Native American communities, but it did exist in quite a few. Is that be pre-colonial individuals who had the identity of both male, female. So even if they were dominant in one or the other, like someone who's transgendered, they were actually given a special place within the Native American community because it was believed that they had the essence of both men and women. So they were wiser. They were stronger on the female, but were more caretaking than the male side of them. Now, of course, with colonialism, Christianity coming into a lot of Native American communities, this idea was squashed, but it has over the last couple of decades started a revival within Native American communities to bring this notion of two-spirited people back into the communities and put them at the place where they can be best understood. Okay. The other one is gender queer. And I always laugh at this one because culturally and pop culturally, please don't take this definition of queer as something that meets with what we probably view in pop culture or popular culture. But what genderqueer is when we research it is when someone takes their gender identity to an extreme. So you can think of a very flamboyant, feminine gay man, a very butch, male oriented woman. But this also includes, though, men who strongly identify as being a man and very masculine, and a woman who identifies as being very feminine and expresses that femininity, just like the man who is very masculine. I've always wanted to see if anyone would ever go up to a very masculine man and say, hey, you're queer. I don't recommend it. I put that challenge out there and no one ever took me up on it, but I also don't want my name put in with that challenge. But when we're talking about gender queer, at least for the sake of definition right now, think of it as someone who has an extreme gender expression of their identity. But then in next class, we'll get a little bit more into the pop culture view of what it means to be queer or gender queer. Okay. Another level of terminology is then gender expression. Okay. And you could probably guess, this is our lineage for a large portion of our population. But so we usually think of men being more masculine. If we define what masculine is, it's we think of things like strength, power, dominance, controlling or controlled, non-emotional, and those kinds of things. Feminine, when we think of it on an extreme other side, is more nurturing, caring, empathetic, very emotionally expressive. And then those tend to be the more feminine qualities. Okay. Now, why we need to identify the difference between your gender identity and your gender expression is because given situational variables, a very masculine man could act very caring and nurturing. Okay. I see this meme on Facebook. I shouldn't use Facebook because it ages me, I believe now, but on Facebook that says, no matter how strong or masculine you are, if a 4-year-old hands you a play phone, you answer it and you talk to them. Okay. No matter what. But that simple kind of analogy is the indicative of that people who may have a strong male gender identity can at times act feminine. Okay. Just as much as a woman who identifies strongly as being a feminine woman can have masculine traits given the demands of the situation, such as if a child becomes endangered for some reason in leadership positions that require direct and concise decision making that is more power oriented. Okay. All of those can happen and we can all express differently even when our gender identity is separate from that. Okay. Kind of a middle term that often is used that when a person, you can identify a person as being either a man or woman is the term androgynous. Androgynous basically is someone who does not express their identity strongly. So they might dress more unisex. They might not put on, if they're a woman, they might not put on a whole bunch of makeup and all of those kinds of things. If they're a man, they may not do the whole chest puffing things around other men and those kinds of things. They act more unfamiliar. Okay. And so this is the notion of androgyny. And we've noticed over the last several decades that this is actually becoming more of what people want to express as far as their gender. It's becoming more and more popular according to some current research on the issue. Okay. So we go from there, from gender expression. So now we need to talk about things like sexual orientation. So this is who we are attracted to for sexual and emotional reasons. Okay. And this is important to state about sexual orientation. Human beings don't necessarily reproduce have sex for reproductive reasons. In fact, when we look at the ratio between a pregnancy and the number of times humans have sex, it's 2,000 to 1. Okay. But what we have learned is that sexual orientation tends to be first a bonding agent, and then a reproductive mechanism. Okay. Now, please don't go test the 2,000 to 1 ratio because the numbers are a little bit more complicated than that. But I just want to point out that we usually have sex for more reasons than reproduction. Okay. But again, when we look at it from the sex through gender perspective, we see that, males tend to be on a majority way, tend to be attracted to women, and females tend to be attracted to men. Okay. Now, with that being said, when we get to attraction and whatnot, we're going to see that this relationship is much more complicated. We will see that there are very masculine men who will go through even if it's just a short period of time, a curiosity phase of what it would be like to be with another man. And we see the same thing with women. So this can be adjusted based upon time in our life and our experience. Okay. Two kind of different terms that can be highlighted in this notion is the terms of, for example, a bisexual or pansexual. Okay. Bisexual isn't that a person is attracted totally to women and men, and that's one of the misnomers about bisexuality. Bisexuality individuals usually do have a primary preference, but they also can find themselves attracted to the different or same sex. Okay. Pansexual, however, are individuals who don't necessarily look at anything like gender expression or gender identity or any of those kind of traditional lines of attraction. They can be attracted to a wide variety of people, including, transgender, genderqueer, androgynous, masculine, feminine. What we're finding with this topic, and this is one of those topics that tends to be in a lot of debate today in the literature, is we're wondering if these individuals are attracted to more of a psychological qualities, such as personality qualities, such as outgoingness, closed-minded, open-minded, um, and those other, I can't think of the rest of them right now, other different personality factors, and less upon the physical traits of the individual. So this is an interesting topic within the literature right now, really trying to decide if if they are just truly attracted to everyone, or is there something beyond just physical desire that attracts them to another person? Okay. All right. Just like there's a difference between gender identity and gender expression, we do need to note that can be a difference between sexual orientation and sexual behavior. Okay. So in this particular notion, there's a lot of factors that really can determine who human beings will have sexual relationships with. Okay. Probably the most stereotypical type is when you limit access of a gender, that can determine their sexual behavior. So you think about men who claim to be straight, cisgender, but they go to prison and they engage in sexual activities with other inmates. Okay. Reasoning, and we can see that with females as well. Please don't think I'm stereotyping just men, but we find whenever we limit access to a preferred sexual partner, then people will engage in sexual behaviors with what is available, as you would say. The other thing is that sometimes we can have a strong orientation based on our gender identity, but that doesn't always equal who we will engage with. And then there's a couple of studies. One of them, a fellow classmate, I'm going to say, was doing a study on Craigslist, way back when. I can't even remember when Craigslist used to have personal ads. One of those personal ads were for men seeking men. Okay. And so for his research, what he did is he got on and he solicited to these men seeking other men. And of course, when they met up with each other, he wanted to know why they wanted to engage in that kind of behavior. And the interesting part about that research that he did is that he found that greater than 80% of the men who are seeking, especially encounters where no one else would find out. Okay. I can't remember the term for it, but it's when you go for an encounter and no one's going to find out or shouldn't find out. He found that greater than 80% of these men would be defined as cisgender, meaning they have a strong belief in men and women should be the only sexual orientation for each other. and they tended to be more masculine. They scored higher on masculine traits than other individuals, okay, or the base population, as you would say. So that study kind of indicates that if the opportunity sometimes of curiosity without someone knowing can come up, that can then relate to sexual behaviors. On the women's side of the equation, we have found that that again, when we're talking about greater than about 80% of women will have a physical sexual response to images of other women despite their sexual orientation or their gender identity. Okay. So this is what we need to, when we're talking about sexual orientation and sexual behavior, yes, we can have an orientation, but that doesn't always equal the behavior that we engage in. Okay. All right. So if we were to look at it from a Venn diagram perspective, this is kind of what it would look like. We have you or I in the center, and we have these orientations, the assignment at birth, the gender expressions, and the gender identities. And we're a combination, a complex combination of each of these, okay? There are some terms that I do want to go over because they do, when we get into culture, these are terms that often will be of interest, okay? The first term that I just want to bring up is the term asexual, okay? Asexuality, and there's a term kind of when we get into attraction and romance that is called aromantic. I'm just going to put AR for aromantic, okay? Asexual individuals are people who have really no interest in sex or sexuality, okay? Um, an aromantic is someone who has no interest in a romantic, intimate relationship, okay? But you can be asexual and still want a romantic relationship, okay? You can be aromantic and still want to have sex and sexual interactions, okay? But there's a few things I want to talk about on this asexual level. One is um, um, for a person who is asexual, meaning that they have never really had sexual desires, is there something quote unquote wrong with them? The answer is no. They don't have hormone imbalances. They don't have any different brain structures than anyone else. They just simply don't have that desire. Okay. The other part about asexuality is we will all go through a period of life where sex is not interesting to us or we're not desiring of it. Okay. So it's also a normal part of individuals who do have sexual expressions. All right. Now, this is where we need to talk about things like culture. And this is kind of going to headway into lectures this coming Monday. Okay. When I worked for a behavioral health unit at a college, I always had students who were on the brink of suicide. Okay. Because they were feeling so much pressure to get a boyfriend, to have sex, to do all of those things. But they had no desire for it. But they went ahead and did it despite their belief because mom and dad bugs them, the roommates bug them, everyone's bugging them about getting a boyfriend or having sex or having a girlfriend or getting in a relationship. Okay. And come to when talking with them, the truth is that they just don't have that desire, and that's okay. All right. The thing that I want to think you to think upon in this idea is if you do have someone in your family that has no interest in getting in relationships, has no interest in sex, has none of those interests. I'm just going to go on my soapbox. Leave them the freak alone. There's nothing wrong with them. There's something wrong with you if you constantly are bugging someone like that, and you really need to evaluate what's going on. Okay, because I unfortunately have lost some students and some clients due to this issue, and I've had to spend hours and hours and hours helping them so they didn't lose them. Okay, so sorry, this is a sensitive topic for me, as you could probably tell, but it's the interplay between culture and lived experience that we really need to have a conversation about sometime. Okay. And then we kind of went over some of the rest of these. I'm not sure if there's any different ones. Does anybody have any questions about any of these terms? You could put your question in the chat. You can unmute yourself. You can raise your hand. I'll give you a few seconds to look at them. That was the one that I had to cover because it's my soapbox issue. Right. Thanks, Gwyneth. Hearing none, we'll get into this on Monday. I'm going to stop here.